This is Alan Seaborn from Winning at Home. Welcome to In Progress, a podcast about faith, life, and how we grow. And for this episode, I'm going to share a passage that really stuck out to me recently, and it stuck out to me in a way that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, because as I've mentioned, who knows how many times through all these different episodes, the way that I connect with most everything is on an intellectual level. I really enjoy thinking. I love coming up with maybe not even brand new ideas, but synthesizing some different ideas and kind of tying them together in a way that makes sense and in a way that takes, I guess, kind of bridges the gap between what we think of as kind of our non-spiritual life, our day-to-day, the things we come across, the things we read about, the things we hear about, and our spiritual life when we're trying to focus in on God. And so I love to kind of figure out ways to bridge those gaps, and sometimes I do it more successfully than others. But, that's what I really love to do. And so usually when a verse jumps out at me, it jumps out because I really connect with it on more of an intellectual level. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, I was reading and a verse really jumped out at me, and it wasn't on that intellectual level. It was on an emotional level. And that's unique. That surprised me, actually, because that's not something that happens to me very often. Usually when I get excited about things and when I feel emotion about things, it's because I'm excited about the intellectual connection I've made with this thing. So as I'm recording this, I kind of feel like I'm wandering into an area that I really don't know very well, that I really am not super comfortable in. And partly because of that, but partly because I don't want to take this emotional connecting verse or passage and kind of intellectualize it to death. This is going to be, I think, a pretty short episode, because what I want to do is I want to invite you to open up, to experience this same just raw emotional truth of what David in Psalm chapter 62 was writing and singing and praising to God, and some things that on a deep, deep level we know are true. And so Psalm 62, I'm going to kind of skip around as I'm reading these verses. Psalm 62 starts with this in verse 1. Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken. Now that last word there, shaken, I can't help but inject some intellectual stuff here. Some of the I think the translations, but definitely one of the commentaries that I looked at said maybe shaken is almost too light of a word here, or too light of a translation here, because it's not communicating that there won't be any teetering, any shaking, any disruption along the way, but that it's not going to be shaken on a larger scale, like ruined. He is my fortress. I will never be, destroyed, shaken to the point of coming apart, shaken to the point of just being done. And then what David does is he spends, in this passage, he has maybe 3 different times where he comes back to this truth about who God is. And then in between those moments where he's coming back and remembering who God is, he spends some time talking about what he's dealing with in the here and now. And so verse 3 and 4, he talks about people who are assaulting him, who are trying to tear him down and want to topple him from his lofty place. And we don't know exactly what he's talking about here, but we can kind of picture that this is the guy who spent a good chunk of his life on the run from the king of Israel, Saul, who wanted him dead. And so he starts the passage, he starts this chapter by talking about God as my rock and salvation. And then a couple verses of talking about, hey, and here's what I'm dealing with real life wise. Here's some of the stuff that I really feel like, man, this stuff is just draining me. It's taking it out of me. It's really something that's just harassing me constantly. And then after those 2 verses talking about that, verse 5, he says, yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. Trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge. And then he spends a little bit of time in the next 2 verses talking about finding value in people, finding value in stuff. And he ends Psalm 62 with these 2 verses. Verse 11 and 12, one thing God has spoken, 2 things I have heard. Power belongs to you, God, and with you, Lord, is unfailing love. And you reward everyone according to what they have done. And when I read through and see this, the words that are popping to my mind are, see this kind of ebb and flow. See the way that David is starting, reminding himself, find rest in God. And then he writes a couple verses, okay, and this is what's going on. This is what people are doing. And then he goes back to, okay, find rest in God. And then a couple verses, okay, this is what is tempting to find value in, right? People and stuff. And then he comes back to God once again. And I want to remind you that the reality of life, like what David was writing about and what he experienced, is we're going to be going through stuff. We're going to be going through things that are discouraging and demoralizing and make us wonder if we're even doing the right thing, if any of this even matters in the first place. And when we're there, if we can remember David's approach here to start with God, spend some time thinking and worrying and complaining after that about what's actually going on, and then come back to God, then spend a little more time. Like I say, this is this ebb and flow. Complaining and, oh man, this is going on. This is tough. It's easy for me to get distracted by this, that, the other, and then come back to God. So I want to, like I said, this is going to be a short episode. I want to end just by reading Psalm 62, verse 8. And I want to remind me and you to keep coming back to this. No matter what it feels like life is throwing at us, no matter what feels like it's too overwhelming and we just can't do it. David says, trust in him at all times, you people. Pour out your hearts to him, for God is our refuge.